There are men who are born into greatness, and then there are men who take it by force. He was not royal. He was not favored. He was not supposed to rise, but into ashes of a dying empire. A boy from Corsica carved his name into history with fire and blood. He rewrote the art of war, crowned himself emperor, crushed kings, and became a myth before he became a man. To some, he was a tyrant. To others, a god of war. His ambition reshaped the world. His legacy still echoes in every strategy, every battlefield, every nation that fears one man's will. His name is Napoleon Bonaparte, and this is the war from his eyes. Put on your headphones. Close your eyes. This isn't just a story. It's an experience. You're about to step into the boots of one of history's most brilliant minds. Feel the frost of Russia, the roar of cannons, the weight of the crown. Prepare to become Napoleon. Act 1. The Corsican Flame. I was not born into power. I was born into defiance. Corsica, a land of rebels, of stone and salt, of silence and fire. The French came with treaties. The Italians left behind their claims. And I was caught between two worlds I never asked for. My name was Napoleon Bonaparte. But back then, I was just the son of a Corsican lawyer, surrounded by whispers of revolution and betrayal. My father sought French favor, titles, prestige, a place at their table. But I wanted to flip their table over. They sent me to France to be educated, to be refined. What they did was throw a wolf into a ballroom. I was 9, alone, surrounded by polished accents and powdered wigs. I didn't speak their language. I didn't eat their food. I didn't laugh when they laughed. They called me names, mocked my walk, my silence. But I didn't break. I observed. I watched how they carried themselves, the way they obeyed rank without question, the way their faces changed when someone powerful entered the room. I memorized everything, not to fit in, but to understand how to break it. While they slept, I read. While they flirted with noble daughters, I studied Caesar. While they polished their boots, I redrew maps, geometry, history, artillery, philosophy. I didn't just learn how to fight. I learned how to predict motion, of troops, of weather, of men. I understood silence. I respected it. Because when you are silent long enough, people reveal themselves. I didn't crave command. I craved control. Corsica taught me to resist. France taught me to adapt. But war would teach me how to reshape the world. I remember one night. Rain pounded against the shutters. I was outside. No coat, no comfort. Just thunder rolling like distant cannon fire. My fingers were frozen, but my eyes burned. I wasn't praying. I wasn't waiting. I was promising myself something. One day, they'll say my name before I even enter the room. One day, I will not beg for power. I will be power. I will not ask for their attention. I will demand their submission. That night, I didn't sleep. I stood until the rain stopped, and when the sky cleared, I felt something inside me settle, like a drawn sword. I knew then I wasn't meant to live quietly. I was not meant to blend in. I was meant to conquer. Let them laugh at the Corsican boy. Let them scoff at my accent, my size, my birth. They were feeding a fire they could never extinguish. And when that fire reached their gates, they would remember the boy they mocked. And they would kneel. End of Act 1. They laughed at my name. They spat at my silence. But I swore. One day they would all kneel before it. If you're enjoying this so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I drop deep content like this every week, and trust me, it only gets better from here. Act 2. Brilliance in the Barracks. The barracks were not a school. They were a battlefield, but quieter. Instead of bullets, we fired glances. Instead of wounds, we wore rumors. And in the corners of that cold academy, I sharpened myself. I was still the Corsican, still the foreigner, still the strange boy with too much ambition and not enough polish. My accent betrayed me. My name confused them. My silence unnerved them. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I absorbed it. Let them speak. Let them underestimate. They spent nights drinking, chasing flirtations, basking in borrowed titles. I spent nights with maps, charts, history books, the mathematics of destruction. I found comfort in precision, in artillery, the one part of war you could measure, the arc of a cannonball, the echo of thunder through a valley, the timing between orders and action. It made sense, and I made it mine. They taught formation. I studied maneuver. They taught obedience. I studied leverage. I knew the names of men who had conquered entire continents before they were 20, and I swore I'd join them. I trained my body, yes, but my real weapon was patience. I watched instructors, how they moved, where their eyes went during drills. I memorized their mistakes, because one day I'd be writing new drills. The world was changing outside. The revolution had started to boil. Whispers of collapse, hints of executions, echoes of freedom and fear. And while the nobility panicked, I prepared. They studied to serve. I studied to rule. I remember the smell of gunpowder on my skin the first time I commanded a test battery. The way the ground shook beneath me. The way the smoke wrapped around my shoulders like destiny. I was made for this. My uniform still hung loose on me. My boots still squeaked like a recruit. But my mind marched decades ahead. I didn't want to rise through the ranks. I wanted to skip the ladder entirely. Let them spend their lives chasing approval. I would wait for chaos. Because when the world starts burning, people don't look for titles. They look for someone who already feels like a flame. End of Act 2. Let them chase women and wine. I chase history. Act 3. The Revolution's General. France was not a nation. It was a fever. The revolution had torn it apart. Priests executed, kings beheaded, streets soaked in blood and flags. The guillotine became the clock by which the days passed. And yet, I felt no fear, only opportunity. The old world was dying. The question was, who would build the new one? Toulon was the answer. A port city strangled by royalists and occupied by the British fleet. They gave me no command. I took it. I arrived with blueprints and artillery mathematics, not speeches. I didn't need glory. I needed range, angle, elevation, and obedience. I studied the terrain like scripture, noted the choke points, measured the wind, and then I did what no one expected. I silenced the British guns, one by one, shell by shell, with fire and fury. I shattered the harbor's illusion of safety. Ships burned, men scattered, Toulon fell, and in its ashes, they saw my name carved in smoke. Napoleon. I was 24. They sent me to Paris, thinking they could contain me, dress me up, parade me like a trophy of the revolution. But I didn't come for praise. I came for power. October 5th, 1795. Royalists flooded the streets. The government trembled. The people waited. I gave the order. Grape shot ripped through the cobbled avenues. It wasn't just a defense, it was a warning. The uprising ended before it began. They called it the whiff of grape shot. I called it a demonstration. From that moment forward, the Republic knew I wasn't a servant of the revolution. I was the blade it feared, and the shield it needed. I was not their equal. I was their future. And I had only just begun. End of Act 3. While others lost their heads in the revolution, I found mine. Act 4. The Italian Lightning. They gave me a starving army, torn boots, no morale, thin rations, eyes full of doubt, but I didn't see weakness. I saw potential. Italy was a chessboard, and I was ready to play 10 moves ahead. The generals before me had moved slow, safe. I moved like a storm. I broke rules, split my forces, took risks. I struck from directions they never anticipated. Where others saw snow-capped barriers, I saw corridors. Where they saw impassable ridgelines, I saw ambushes waiting to happen. I didn't just fight battles. I designed them. I calculated pressure points, provoked, flanked, crushed. I led from the front. My coat covered in ash, my boots soaked in mud, my sword never far from reach. My men began to chant my name, not out of ceremony, but out of trust. They followed because they believed I would lead them to something greater. And I did. You are naked, ill-fed, and neglected. The government owes you much and gives you nothing, but I will lead you to rich provinces, to honor, to victory. Soldiers of Italy, will you follow me? They answered with thunder, and Italy bowed. Milan fell, then Mantua, then every fortress in the north. I dictated peace terms with a pen in one hand and a sword in the other. I made Austria beg for air. The newspapers back in France called me a genius. They didn't understand. I wasn't just winning battles. I was mastering the psychology of conquest. I spread proclamations like wildfire through enemy towns, promised liberty, spoke of unification. I didn't just conquer land. I conquered minds. In salons across Europe, they began to whisper, "Who is this man?" In war rooms, they asked, "How do we stop him?" Diplomats stammered when they met me. Kings hesitated to speak first, because I wasn't just a general now. I was a force. I was 26, and France no longer knew whether to cheer or fear me. End of Act 4. I took the crown from God's altar and placed it on my own head. Quick pause before we get into the next chapter. If you're still watching, you're clearly built different. Tap that sub button and let's keep building. Act 5. The Egyptian Mirage. Italy had crowned me with glory. But I wanted more than applause. I wanted legacy. Caesar had marched through Egypt. Alexander had touched Asia. So I followed their ghosts into the desert. Not for France, not for revolution, for immortality. They gave me 35,000 men, and I gave them the promise of eternity. Alexandria. Taken. Cairo. Ours. Then came the pyramids. I stood before them, monuments older than Christ, casting shadows across time. And I said, "Soldiers, from the heights of these pyramids, 40 centuries look down upon you." The men cheered, but I wasn't speaking to them. I was speaking to history. The Mamluks came like thunder, cavalry, swords, banners, but they met squares of steel. My artillery shattered their charge. My formations broke their spirit. The sands drank their pride. Egypt was mine, and still it was not enough. I sought the East, Persia, India. Visions of empire danced in my mind. But fate had other plans. The British fleet found us. Abu Qir Bay. Nelson's cannons tore through our ships. I watched the horizon glow with fire. My navy gone. We were trapped, surrounded by desert, disease, silence. But I refused to break. I studied the Quran, wrote about Islam, carved alliances with scholars. I turned occupation into manipulation. I held court in Cairo, wore silks, spoke of enlightenment. But deep inside, I felt it. The shift. I had gone too far, reached too high. The desert showed me something the Alps never had. Isolation. My men grew sick, my officers grew quiet, my letters home grew darker. And still I dreamed. I dreamed of empire. I couldn't see the trap closing. I thought I had outpaced history, but I was only feeding it. When I sensed France trembling, I knew what I had to do. I left, quietly, abandoned the army, crossed the sea like a shadow, and stepped back into Europe. Not as a general, but as a myth. The Egyptian sands never crowned me, but they forged something else. The beginning of my end. And I was too proud to see it. End of Act 5. Act 6. Coup of 18, Brumaire. I returned to France, cloaked in silence. No parades, no fanfare, no speeches. I had left behind an army in Egypt, half buried in sand and disease. But I came back with something greater. Momentum. Paris was broken. The government fractured, scrambling like rats in a flood. The revolution had devoured its own children. And now, only fear remained. And in that fear, I saw my opening. They called me a hero. I let them. They said I could save the Republic. I smiled. I didn't want to save it. I wanted to replace it. The coup of 18 Brumaire, a date most forget. But I never will. I walked into the chambers with calm, surrounded by trembling politicians, my uniform pressed, my eyes steady. They shouted, argued, accused. I said nothing. I had already won. The army was mine. The streets were silent. The people were tired. I didn't need their votes. I needed their submission. When one dared call me a traitor. I looked him in the eyes and reminded him that France had no crown left to betray. My brother stood beside me. The soldiers entered the hall, and in a breath, it was done. No blood, no banners, just silence. I was named first consul. But titles mean nothing when you already command the room. I rewrote the government, buried the old laws, built new ones with my own hands. I brought order to the chaos, bread to the starving, victories to the borders. And with every solution I offered, they gave me more power. I took it calmly, without force, without protest, because I had already become what they feared, the new monarch, wrapped in the robes of revolution. I was no longer the Corsican boy, no longer the outcast in the academy. I was France, and I had crowned myself, without needing a throne. Let them call it a coup. Let the old guard write their complaints in ink. History would write something else. It would write, "This is the day Napoleon took the world Be sure to subscribe, as we are just only getting started. The amazing story of Napoleon will continue on the next video.